Hey internets. First off, this video has an extra special sponsor, one that actually ties into the subject of this video, and that sponsor is The Great Rebellion by KVLT Games, which is available now on Steam. This game features a story that is absolutely hilarious, and is one of the few titles out there that has the guts to actively make fun of Clown World and DEI by pushing authoritarian woke ideology to its absurd conclusions. And you know they hit the target because it got banned in Germany. But besides the fantastic dark humor, the gameplay itself is a lot of fun. The Great Rebellion is a perfectly competent, fast-paced roguelike featuring a classic 16-bit graphical style with unique mechanics that blend shmup and platformer dashing goodness. It features tons of upgrades, over 60 weapons, plenty of items to augment the experience, spirits to collect which gives you even more abilities, and all of this combined with the random level generation creates a large amount of variety in what you can do. Oh, and as an added bonus, it's multi-OS and runs natively on Linux. Trust me, this is going to matter a lot more in the coming years. Anyways, The Great Rebellion is currently on sale for $14.99 for just a few more days, so be sure to get it while you can, because it's well worth the price for the fun you are getting. A direct link to the game's Steam page will be included in the description below, and as well as a pinned comment. And again, the game story meshes well with the subject of today's video, so I will be showing you the new player experience in the background while getting into that topic, which is updating the concept of useful idiots for 2024 and beyond. Now, for those who don't know, the term useful idiot isn't necessarily intended to be an insult. Here's a quick rundown. The term useful idiot, at least according to Webster at first, for a simple definition, is a naive or credulous person who can be manipulated or exploited to advance a cause or political agenda. Now, the history of the term has a very large tie-in with communism and socialism, and has been pretty commonly used since the mid-90s or so to describe the common phenomenon that a lot of the foot soldiers for communist and Marxist rhetoric tend to act as activists for a cause that they don't really understand. They've never really thought out the consequences of their actions too well, and as a result, it is extremely easy for them to be manipulated by various forms of propaganda and various tactics of psychological manipulation in order to effectively trick them into supporting a cause that they would never actually support if they truly understood where that cause was leading them in the end. And in the case of the useful idiot, this conclusion usually involves the installment of some all-powerful leader that doesn't actually have their best interests in mind. Hence why they are called useful idiots. They are considered idiots because they do not understand the consequences of where their actions are leading them, and they are considered useful to the all-powerful regime that they will ultimately install and support. Now, the reason this is commonly used to describe communism, even though it could be applied to other ideologies, comes from former KGB propagandist Yuri Bezmenov, whose main claim to fame is that he was a Soviet journalist who defected to the West when he noticed just how corrupt the KGB had become and how they were going after journalists who would not toe the line. In other words, the same kind of ideological intolerance we are starting to see today within the cathedral of academia plus journalism is not actually a new thing, but rather it's a common historical phenomenon where corrupt actors use it to try and hold on to power, by ensuring that any intellectual who does not regurgitate narrative, trademark, is effectively pushed out of the intellectual circle, either by violence or by shunning. Now, when Bezmenov came to the West, he started talking to us about how KGB propaganda tended to work, mainly how they would take advantage of, again, the useful idiots. You see, a lot of times the far left is easily fooled into chasing the equality cake. They end up idealistically believing in this beauty of communist or socialist utopia, where as long as collectivist equality is somehow achieved, then all of their problems would just be magically solved. He then pointed out how a lot of the propaganda was starting to take root in the United States, stating, "You're leftists in the United States. All these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion, only to destabilize a nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore." You see, the problem with activists who are pushing for an authoritarian goal is that they imagine themselves in power, or they at the very least imagine someone with the same ideology who will then enact exactly the same thing that they would do if they were in power. And this doesn't actually happen. In fact, it can't happen because each individual activist usually has slightly different ideas of what they consider equality, socialism, and communism to even be. So ultimately, the regime that they prop up is doomed to betray them, and they are doomed to never really get what they want. Now, that's the basic history of the term for useful idiot, but I'd like to point out how we can push this a little bit further. You see, the problem with the term useful idiot is that it can be a little bit too narrow at times. Mainly, it doesn't fully point out what's really going wrong inside of these people's heads. what exactly is the thought process inside these people's heads? Because we are seeing the exact same thing today being mirrored in woke DEI activists, in their constant demand for universal equity and their willingness to accept authoritarian statist measures to achieve it, even though the power dynamics of today are quite a bit more complicated than they were about 70 years ago. So I'm going to propose this. Instead of using the term useful idiot, it is better instead to call them philosophically illiterate. Now, a person who is philosophically illiterate is someone who has not put in the intellectual effort needed to understand the implications of their own beliefs, and as a result, easily falls victim to accepting inconsistent or incoherent applications of ideology and philosophy. Now, the reason this is better and more in tune with calling out the nonsense of modern clown world is that it emphasizes the fact that you don't necessarily need to be an outright activist to be contributing to the societal rot that philosophical illiteracy leads to. Like, for example, an archetype I talked about in my previous blog rant video. I brought up the fact how in the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of what you would call boomer libtoids, who are generally boomers and Generation X people whose understanding of liberalism just sort of froze sometime in the 1970s. And so they still act and think like it's around 1979 or something, while refusing to consider where their political beliefs are actually leading them. They generally believe whatever propaganda MSNBC or CNN or other cable TV news media has to tell them, and have basically no understanding of what's going on in the world besides what they are fed through the TV. And if you actually try to reason with one of these people, you'll quickly find it to be a totally fruitless waste of time, because their entire outlook in life is centered around believing whatever the media tells them, and anything that says otherwise is a conspiracy theory. For instance, if you try to explain to a boomer liberal that something Anderson Cooper or Rachel Maddow told them isn't true, you'll probably either be met with blank stares, or they will simply say, well, you can't possibly be smarter than Cooper or Rachel Maddow. You can't be smarter than the people on TV. Therefore, you must be wrong. The idea that what they're seeing on cable TV news could just be propaganda and is actually being dishonest to them simply just doesn't ever occur to the boomer liberal. The extent of their beliefs in their entire lives is effectively just centered around believing what they're told by, again, MSNBC and CNN. This is, in their minds, unquestionable, and it is also how their philosophical illiteracy manifests. The boomer liboid doesn't actually understand anything he's been told, of course. They just view it as the expert's trademark have told them to think this. And so DEI is good because MSNBC told them so. And they should always vote for the Democratic Party because MSNBC told them so. The West has not meaningfully declined beyond 1970s because MSNBC hasn't really told them anything that would allow them to think otherwise. That is pretty much the extent of the boomer lib mindset. But again, that's an easy, boring example because I've kind of already talked about them before in other videos. How about a newer, different example? Like the eternal product consumer who thinks that he's above it all. These are the people who try to arrogantly act like politics, philosophy, and ideology are all somehow beneath them. That only losers care about these things, so shut up and consume product with me. Pretty sure everyone's ran into people like this before. You try to bring up any kind of deeper philosophical or political topic with them, and they'll say something on the lines of, oh, shut up, man, no one cares about that crap. And then they will proceed to consume product of some sort. Either they'll go back to consuming their latest schlop, or maybe they'll go back to vaping, while playing the latest game filled with DEI propaganda without even thinking about it. Now, of course, what the eternal product consumer doesn't realize, or perhaps maybe they get it, but they just don't want to admit it, is that it's not so much that deeper topics of ideology, philosophy, or politics are beneath them, but rather it is them who are beneath those topics. They simply do not want to put in the effort to think about what they believe, and are trying to pass off their intellectual laziness for some kind of sophisticated, enlightened position that the rest of us just can't possibly comprehend. But of course, the fraudulence of the eternal product consumer is revealed when you see what they actually vote for. You see, everyone believes in something. Everyone has some kind of ideology. We all have thoughts that all lead towards intended goals. So a person who acts like they're above having beliefs simply has beliefs that they have not examined. The eternal product consumer, of course, has consumed, well, a lot of propaganda. A whole lot of propaganda, which they have chosen to accept and internalize subconsciously rather than consciously. So what does the product consumer do? Well, they vote for the establishment again, and they vote in support of DEI policies, because that is what the propaganda they have consumed has told them to think. And if you ever hang around a product consumer type long enough, it becomes pretty obvious that this is the case. They may act like they're above having any kind of consistent beliefs, but they'll eventually talk about it. And when they do, it's always the most milquetoast 99 IQ opinion you can possibly imagine. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum of the product consumer who thinks that none of these things matter at all, while ultimately holding some kind of belief anyways, The next example would be the woke cathedralite. These are people who are either members of the elite themselves or are wannabes of the elite. These are the people who are constantly trying to get in good standing with mainstream intellectual institutions, such as academia and journalism. So these people, of course, say that ideology, philosophy, and politics matters a lot. And to that extent, of course, they're correct. People tend to act in ways to reach their intended goals based on their beliefs. So, of course, their beliefs matter a lot. Now, the problem is that the woke cathedralite is simply a midwit. They simply engage in hamsterizations and perversions of logic in order to justify believing in whatever the most popular politics are of the intellectual institutions for which they are trying to seek prestige in. And because of this, they don't truly consider the logical conclusions of those beliefs. Rather, prestige-seeking cathedralites just try to understand these things to the extent that they convince themselves that they are true. They may go beneath the surface on these things and navel-gaze a bit, and maybe the smarter ones will even manage to publish some bogus academic papers, which are ultimately just virtue signals disguised as research. But they'll never really go deep into these beliefs. They'll never really question them. Because the thing about midwits is that most of them actually do kind of know that they aren't really capable of putting up a fight against these institutions. This was ironically proven very recently in a study that showed that most psychology professors tend to self-censor on taboo topics. Thus, their intellectual navel-gazing can never actually go that far below the surface, at least not enough to actually question the establishment. And so what do most cathedralites do? What is it you think that these people vote for? Well, surprise, surprise, they end up voting for authoritarian left parties and adopting DEI politics, because that is where the dominant ideology of these institutions currently leads. And then when all is said and done, you have the woke activist as our final but most important example, because most of what these people do ultimately just gives more hegemonic control to the current establishment, which is strange because the woke activist mobs, such as Antifa, BLM, or whatever the current thing happens to be, if you talk to any of these people, they're pretty sure that they're against the establishment, and they will swear up and down on their mother's honor that they are certainly not useful idiots for globalist control. But of course, that's exactly what they are. And if we take a moment to examine the things they believe and examine their motivations, it's pretty easy to see why they are. While activists may vary from person to person, they are generally motivated by a few shared beliefs, all of which have demonstrable instances of philosophical illiteracy. The first of these is that they stand against inequality and hierarchy, which at first glance for regular people might, on a surface level before the ideology is, critically examined, may seem like a reasonable idea. They are correct that hierarchies can result in coercive behavior, and that power can be exploited by those who hold it. The problem is they take the delusional approach of assuming hierarchy itself can be abolished, often stating the mantra that there's no such thing as harmless power. And the problem with this is that it's completely impossible. Power is an integral component of how reality works. Just like the planets revolve around the sun, the journalist relies on the notoriety of their platform, or the academic relies on the credibility of their intellectual institution, and the politician relies on the strength of their support within their nation. Power is simply the reality of dependency. You can never actually get rid of it. Someone or something, even if that something is a popular ideology, must own Bartertown. So of course you can't actually get rid of hierarchies, you can only mitigate potential problems by pushing for more voluntary systems that cause the hierarchies to become decentralized. The woke mobs, however, have not realized this. They haven't thought things through. They attack the very nature of hierarchy itself, often guided by the beliefs that the existence of hierarchy implies that discrimination has occurred. They have this knee-jerk assertion that whoever has more power must have done something wrong to gain it. So of course, they demand more civil rights and demand more government programs to enact equity-based policies, demand tighter economic regulations, demand policies to force inclusion and diversity, demand free stuff, etc., and so on and so forth. Now, the problem, of course, is that all of these things require a praxis that creates an even bigger hierarchy and ballooning of the state to actually enact. This happens because forcing groups A and B to be equal in outcome in a way that goes against their natural and voluntary interactions can logically only happen if both A and B have a dependency on that force. Which means that to actually accomplish that, what the woke activists are demanding, this requires the exact opposite of decentralization. Rather, they must centralize the power into C in order to force A and B to be equal. And so thus the woke mob's message ultimately further justifies the status quo and the further condensing of power into the hands of a few global elites. All of this coming from the activists' philosophically illiterate understanding of power dynamics. Or the really delusional ones think that they will be the ones in charge. They think that they will be the C in this A-B equation. They view themselves as being in charge and enacting their ideology, even though this of course will never happen. The second of these beliefs woke activists tend to have comes from this misconception of how government corruption actually works. Most of them believe, strangely enough, that corporations are lobbying the government in order to deregulate the market, which then allows them to gain a monopoly on the market. The problem is that an examination of history and an understanding of how lobbying actually works reveals the exact opposite to be true. In all G7 countries, that includes Canada, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, Italy, Japan, and the United States, all 7 of them, government spending as a percentage of GDP has been going up very steadily since the 1870s. The complexities and numbers of regulations have been going up as well. So if big corporations are lobbying the government to reduce their spending and reduce regulations, they're certainly doing a very poor job of it. Because of course that's not actually how the lobbying and revolving door clown world show works. The way the cronyism machine actually functions is that a corporation will reach some sort of financial agreement with a politician, either a campaign donation or promise of prestigious high-paying position on their board of directors or something. Okay, for simplicity's sake, we'll just call it a bribe. The politician will then usually invest in the corporation's stonks, and then where the magic really comes in is that the politician will pass legislation that is favorable to the corporation that they are in bed with, most of the time involving regulating away the competition or redirecting funds from other sectors of the economy to the industry that the corporation does business in. The corporation's stock prices go up, causing both them and the politician to receive an immediate benefit, and then of course, when their term is up, they go out the revolving door to the prestigious position that they were promised. In other words, they're actually lobbying for regulation, not against it. They lobby for the rules to be written so that it is illegal to compete with them. For instance, a company might lobby for increased patent protection so that they can more easily file thousands of patents, as well as keep those patents for an additional few decades. So that way anyone who potentially tries to compete with them just gets sued into oblivion. That's the kind of thing that more commonly happens in these backroom deals. And so when the woke-toid mob comes in and says that the problem is that lobbying is being done for deregulation and thus the fix to this is that the government needs more power of regulation, as a result of their lack of understanding of how the cronyist machine actually works, they are effectively saying that the solution to the problem of the hitman is that the hitman should be given bigger guns. And third, likely as a result of their misunderstanding of power and cronyism, woke activists conclude that the free market is to blame for all of these problems, and thus more power must be centralized into the globalist machine to fix these alleged wrongdoings. Now, all these archetypes I just went over are very different, and of course individuals within them may vary, but all of them are united by the same problem: philosophical illiteracy. None of them actually understand any of these things that they have been propagandized to go along with, and so they end up just sort of supporting authoritarian solutions without realizing that they are doing so. There are a few exceptions to this case. For instance, there are a few unironically evil communists who are thought leaders within their ideology that think that they will be the ones in charge, and know full well exactly where the ideology leads. But as someone who lives in the Pacific Northwest, I've realized that the majority of these people are really just clueless. They've simply drank the Kool-Aid that the media feeds them. Inequality bad, government solutions good, and thus clown world marches on. Whether it's the boomer lib who refuses to question cable TV propaganda, the consumer narcissist who refuses to understand what their lifestyle depends on, or the mid-witted cathedralite trapped in their ideological echo chamber, or of course the woke activist who unwittingly acts as a foot soldier for the establishment that they claim to be raging against, all of them have this in common. All of them will happily line up and vote for the global establishment that seeks to dominate them, because they are either too afraid or too lazy to question the narratives that they have been fed. So they will continue to support policies that result in centralizing power, and then they will look at each other in confusion as to why nothing has been fixed, at which point they will conclude that they simply need to double their efforts, and continue to support more policies that centralize power. And round it goes in a never-ending cycle until Clown World is fully achieved. How this ties into the Great Rebellion is pretty simple. The story of the Great Rebellion shows a cyberpunk dystopia, where corporate and state power have been completely fused into one centralized force that owns everything while aggressively enforcing woke ideology upon the populace. Now, the story in this game is of course cartoonishly exaggerated, obviously intentionally done so to a cartoonish level for the sake of entertainment. I mean, of course the whole Spirit of Europa thing coming to save you and channeling the power of your ancestors to defeat the globalist hegemony obviously isn't actually going to happen, as based as it would be. However, something very similar to this absolutely could happen. I mean, we see real-life examples of this happening in places like North Korea. Simply extend that globally, and mix it with woke ideology used as its primary self-justification, and even a recipe for something like this, minus the cartoonism, actually happening. A huge monopolistic megacorporation that is allowed to use the aggressive force of the state in order to force behaviors is in fact the logical conclusion of Marxist rhetoric. And if you pay attention, it's also exactly what many global leaders have been saying that they want. But fortunately, we aren't quite there yet, and it could be stopped if enough people wake up and recognize what's going on. Until then, we can at least have some fun. And a game like The Great Rebellion that is actively anti-woke is a great way to do it. So be sure to check that game out. I've been genuinely having quite a bit of fun with it, and it gets a lot crazier and a lot more fast-paced in later levels. Again, the gameplay I'm showing you here in the background is just me playing through the introduction part. Later levels get some much bigger weapons with some pretty well-designed bullet hell mechanics. So yeah, give that game a check out on Steam. It has great reviews. It is a genuinely good and really funny game, and the Steam sale on it is just gonna last for a few more days. But anyways, that is all. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, subscribe, or comment for the algorithm. Or if you really like the video, you can support me on Ko-Fi or Subscribestar, or you can buy a cool shirt. And be sure to check out The Great Rebellion on Steam. The sale ends at May 29th. I mean, it's honestly good enough to get at the full price too, but you might as well get it when it's on sale, you know? So yeah, again, that is all. Till next time.